Welcome, my dear friends. It is fantastic to see you. I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an enjoyer of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic readings of my stories, I provide role-playing game reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. In this episode, we're going to take a look at an old adventure that I like and I've run several times, the Jade Hare. Published for the basic edition of Dungeons & Dragons, this first level adventure module is designed for new dungeon masters and players in mind, and set up to be played through in a single evening even after generating new characters. If you're not into role-playing games, stick around for the story and to learn how people shape our decisions for us. Normally at this point I'd read the back of the module to show how it sold itself, but this module originally had no cover and wasn't for sale, so I can't read the back cover sales pitch. However, the table of contents does have this teaser line, wherein the intrepid adventurers confront the mad warlock Abu Gabar and his evil minions to recover a priceless and ancient jade idol. A note on terminology for the D&D 5th edition players in the audience. The term warlock was used interchangeably with wizard, magic user, and sorcerer back in the day because they were all the same class, magic user. Abu Gabar might be mad, but he didn't sell his soul to anybody for power. As an 8-page adventure with only 16 rooms, I expected this review to be a quick one. But when I looked into the history of the guy who wrote the thing, I found a deep well of things that fascinated me and I thought worth talking about. Written by John Nephew, Nephew started freelancing with TSR while in high school as a teenager. He initially wrote articles in Dragon and Dungeon magazines and went on to work on game books for the Karator setting, the Castle Greyhawk adventure, and Tall Tales of the Wee Folk, a race supplement for the Mystara setting. That's already impressive, but his greatest accomplishments may have come from outside his work with TSR. In the late 80s, Nephew went to work with Mark Reinhagen, who would go on to invent the vampire role-playing game and so one of the most important game designers in the history of the role-playing game industry. At that time, Reinhagen was still pushing the game Ars Magica, which apparently really inspired Nephew, because when Reinhagen and co. moved down to Georgia, Nephew stayed in Minnesota, but made sure to secure the rights to publish new Ars Magica supplements. He then started Atlas Games to work on this and other game lines, and he eventually secured all the rights to Ars Magica, which they continue to publish to this day. Atlas is no slouch in the game design arena either, as they have won 6 industry awards for a variety of games. Besides running an awards-winning game company, Nephew also ran for and won a seat on his city council, which goes to prove that some of these game designers are incredibly multifaceted people, and as a political junkie myself, I want to know how he did it. I found his story to be so fascinating that I sent an interview request to Nephew, so hopefully we'll have that someday in the future for this channel. Past this part of the review, there will be spoilers, so proceed with that caveat in mind. With that warning out of the way, let's get into the adventure. Now, I've recently ran this adventure twice. Once set in the Mystara region called the Emirates of Elarum, which is the module's proper setting, given the fact that it references the prophet Al-Khalim, who was from there, uses Arabic naming styles common in the Elarum sourcebook, and is for the basic D&D setting of Mystara. And once I ran it in Al-Qadim, the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition setting inspired by the tales of 1001 Arabian Nights. Speaking of using this adventure across different editions, that was one of the strengths of the older editions of Dungeons & Dragons. Adventures, mechanics, ideas, they could easily be transported from one to the other, just picking the best concepts you wanted because each of them were set up on the same principles and mechanisms. The Jade Hare has 8 pages, like G1 Studying of the Hill Giant Chief, but it packs nowhere near as much action in the same amount of pages. Instead of a high-level slogfest facing down powerful giants devastating the countryside, the Jade Hare is a basic and fun dungeon crawl intended for first-level characters, who are tasked with helping a village by recovering a beloved artifact from goblin thieves who stole it in a bloodless raid. While the village embraced the religion of Al-Khalim years ago and abandoned many of the idols they used to worship, they held on to one. Despite the condemnation of the prophet and his priests since then, they held on to the Jade Hare. A beautifully carved jade figurine, the villagers believe this idol protects the village, even if they can't say how, and the module makes it clear it is a non-magical item. The text indicates there is a deeper lore surrounding this idol, and I love brain teases like this that invite the players to go on further adventures in search of clues to learn the Jade Hare's true significance and history, which the DM can flesh out. And the module does give pointers on where it came from. The module provides the story setup in box text the DM reads to the players, covers a couple basic details, and then drops the party off at the cave mouth leading into the dungeon. The module is easy to read, easy to understand, and easy to run for a new DM, and I find it a fun diversion as an experienced DM. Not every adventure has to be a big deal storyline. Sometimes you can have fun just knocking around a basic dungeon, which is something that basic D&D adventures excel at. The text gives advice on how to run the enemies, how to set off the traps, and how they can be avoided with context clues observant players can find. And the one map shows off the dungeon pretty well. The dungeon even includes an escape tunnel for the Mad Warlock to beat cheeks through if everything goes against him, and I love my villains having escape tunnels. One thing I really enjoyed is how this module writes the enemies. It gives them personality, little details that you could piece together across the text about Abu Gabar, the Mad Warlock, the goblins, the hobgoblin, and the bugbear minions that he has. Turns out these foes, they're not just monsters standing around a dungeon. Abu Gabar is a 4th level magic user, but he isn't perfect. A thoughtful reading of the adventure shows that he is grasping and frequently doesn't know what he's doing. For example, the text describing his potion laboratory shows a number of mistakes and malfunctioning products of his work. He has a motivational poster up in the dining hall. He lives in a cave 10 miles away from the nearest village in Badlands, and he had to hire these goblins to serve him. It's not like they're so impressed with him that they just came and decided to rally to his banner. No, he has to pay him. But apparently the goblins like him, since when the party enters the kitchen, they find a goblin and hobgoblin making rabbit stew to celebrate the capturing of the Jade Hare. Speaking of which, Abu Gabar tried buying the idol from its keeper, but got turned down, so a month later he sent a goblin raid in to get it. But the goblins didn't kill anybody in the process, and I have never read of a peaceful goblin raid. So that may mean he gave them instructions to not hurt a soul. Another explanation is that the Jade Hare did in fact protect the village, because it made the goblin raiders only commit burglary with no violence. The Mad Warlock also has orders delivered to his home by a merchant the party can meet, so he's not a completely unsocial guy. Now that I think about it, he has a charisma of 7, which is really bad. So he may be a very outgoing guy who probably just comes across terribly to the people of the village because he's weird and doesn't know how to handle himself, and that's why they call him a Mad Warlock. After all, when you go through his rooms, he's not doing anything crazy. He's just doing basic wizard stuff. Abu Gabar also has the service of a young gargoyle who guards his treasure room and the Jade Hare itself. His bugbear lieutenant, who gets his own name, is not only the leader of the goblinoids, but he has a sense of honor and will challenge the party to one-on-one duels if he's outnumbered to make things fair. Upon entering the cave, if the party causes a disturbance with the bats that live there, sentry goblins will head in and warn the rest of the dungeon. The text makes it clear that Abu Gabar has plans and contingencies on how to deal with problems like adventurers. To a low-level party, his organized defense strategies can be extremely lethal. If the party is smart and uses stealth and reconnaissance, like they should be doing, they will be rewarded by getting the drop on isolated enemies that they should be able to overcome in easy or moderately challenging fights. If the party is sloppy, like both mine have been, the enemy will rally and probably result in a total party kill. While the dungeon itself isn't anything special because it is just a few caves with carved square rooms attached, I really enjoyed how alive the enemies are written to be. My version of Abu Gabar also doesn't wear shirts, only a skirt, a high-collared cape, and 2 chest straps to show off his fat gut and oiled-up chest hair. This has consistently amused my players because it's a little ridiculous and he's still a little threatening. There are a few errors in the text that stick out, such as box text leaving out a stream that could be important. It tells the players there are 3 tunnels leading in from the Batcave, but there are only 2. And the Jade Hare history text on the last page suggests it should be read to the players when neither the players nor any of the NPCs have any way of knowing those details. In doing research on this module, I was incredibly surprised to find out how rare this thing is. Copywritten in 1992, the most likely way you were of getting it was the same way I did, and that was not buying it at a store. If you bought the basic D&D black box set and sent in the product registration, then TSR sent you this module for free as a nice way of saying thanks and giving you a standalone adventure to go with the rules you just bought. Later on, TSR made a limited number of copies with a cover using recycled art, apparently involved in TSR's trademark claim for the term Dragon Master. While there is no reference to the term in the module I have, the cover does indeed prominently display the words Dragon Master. I suppose the plan was to slap the term on an existing module, make a very limited release of 5 or so copies to show the trademark office they used it, and then profit somehow. It's a genius plan, no doubt, completely foolproof, I'm sure. Speaking of recycled art, who did the art for the module? Although the table of contents does not credit him, a little research showed the art was done by Ken Frank, who did some great stuff in the Greyhawk setting and elsewhere. While the art is pretty good, it doesn't match the adventure at all. This was obviously filler art, since full plate armored soldiers are out of place in an Arabian setting because they'd roast alive in the heat. The recycled art and the few copies with covers supports the idea that this was at least partially, at some point, a placeholder product intended to support a trademark claim and not much else. Little young me had no idea how rare and expensive this thing would be. At the time of this video recording, an eBay listing for the coverless module is at $729, and one of the covered versions of this adventure once sold for $18,600. In addition to the Wikipedia and drive-thru-RPG references for this adventure, the only other review I could find came from The Lost Adventurer, whose YouTube channel I enjoy very much, so check him out. The simplicity of this module is a strength for the Dungeon Master, because after the quick read-through it takes to make it once through the book, it took virtually no prep time for me to run it at the table. I've enjoyed it every time I've run it, and I will run it again in the future. If you have played or run this adventure, I would love to hear how it went for you, so please drop your thoughts and your experiences in the comments below. I do want to read those. And if you enjoyed this review of the Jade Hare, I too enjoy people liking and subscribing to this channel, so you know what to do. Thank you for your time, and that you chose to spend it with me. It means a lot. Now, as we dear friends are soon to part, I wish you nothing but the best.